Hello and welcome to Game 2 of the Gentry Invitational for Season 16. In this match we'll see Dylan, Pro Point Botten, head up against Sander de Rudder. Dylan has been a tangential player in the Gentry scene, usually pops up around the Gentry Open supported by Sander, and is an all-round really good player that knows how to optimize plays in very tight decks. So we see him here on blue-red aggro, delver, spells, tempo, like all these decks sort of blend into each other. They decided to call this blue-red tempo. So let's have a quick look at what we're dealing with. So very iconic are the Delvers of Secret and electrostatic infantry. We want to have these kinds of threats that come in early and then play around them. So we have the Syncopates to protect them, Arcane Infusion to get to more spells, Lightning Strikes to put extra pressure on, and then maybe a bit awkwardly make disappear, as getting that casualty up isn't gonna be that obvious. So usually this is gonna be played as a 2 mana counter target spell unless its controller pays 2, which is a Quench, and Quench has been played plenty in Gentry, so that is fine. If the game does go into the mid game, Tolarian Terror can show up, or any of the rares that are also very capable of finishing up the game. For Sander, we have a Grixis deck. He submitted this as a black-red vampire, so there is quite some vampire synergy going on, but at its core it's going to be a Grixis good stuff kind of deck. So we have some interaction with cheap removal, Bloodtide Harvester being both a early drop, a pressure card, removal. There's going to be a lot of removal in these colors, so we see those go for the throats. Fake Your Own Death to play more of the cards that he has, and we have Corpse Appraiser, which really interacts favorably in the current Gentry, because it interacts just that little bit with the graveyard, slowing down those Tolarian Terrors, or even getting rid of reanimation targets for decks that we're gonna see later that probably will be a very important segment in the Gentry meta game. A lot of this is going to end up around Tolarian Terror, though this deck has a lot more creatures than some of the other Tolarian Terror decks. Only plays 2 for that reason, probably, so a lot less focus on it. Just a second. Both of these decks are very interactive, so a lot of removal spells, counter spells, draw spells, so there's going to be a lot of action all the time. People will usually have something to do, so let's see who reigns supreme in this match. We have both our players ready to go here. And I think, yes, Sander is on a mulligan. He's on 6 cards. Dylan got to keep his opening 7. Pardon me, it's getting a bit late. So we already see Delver of Secrets highlighted. Should be a card that is going to dictate a lot of what we're going to be playing around in the early game. Dylan trying to drop a Delver of Secrets or an Electrostatic Infantrist on the table and making sure it survives. So much like the mono red deck that we saw Tom play in the first game of the Invitational, that Electrostatic Infantrist can get really big really quickly, but Dylan has ways of protecting it, and that might be a very big difference in how we're gonna see that card. It's probably gonna grow a bit slower because Dylan wants to keep up protection for it. And there we have a double-faced card, but it doesn't matter. Make Disappear takes care of it quench version of Make Disappear. As I said, usually more than good enough. So far the early game has been very anticlimactic. Dylan capable of some very quick and aggressive starts, but doesn't seem to be on that path right now. And there's that electrostatic infanterist with mana up to protect it. That Make Disappear or any of the other counter spells that could be in these decks. So we could have seen an Essence Scatter and Negate as well. As very common cards in Gentry. Second electrostatic infanterist. So any spell Dylan plays is going to be 2+1/+1 counters on this board. As Sander is taking a really slow approach to this game. And we see Blood Tithe Harvester gets the blood token. And he can sacrifice that if he taps the Harvester to give something -2/-2 or -X/-X, where X is 2 times the number of blood tokens he has. The card viewer seems to have some issue pulling the card up. There we go, the Harvester. The card in play is the alternate art version. It looks like I'm gonna eat the microphone, but I'm actually yawning. Rawr, I mean. And Lightning Strike targeting the Harvester. Answering with a Lightning Strike of his own. Making sure he has the opportunity to kill one of the electrostatic infanterists before it gets too much toughness. Even responding with a Reconsider, which was probably what he's playing around, wouldn't have helped to save the electrostatic infanterist. So tight play from both our players here. Not that we've really had that much craziness to interact with. So far the life gain lands are keeping up with whatever the opponents are doing. And Dylan has started chipping away on Sander's life total from now on. And there's the Delver. 4 mana up for protection. Sacrifice the blood token. So he gets to discard and draw. It's something I keep forgetting in blood tokens, that they actually do something. Because there's so much things that refer to blood tokens. You can lose track of the actual utility in them as well. And there we see another Blood Tithe Harvester, but there's already a Lightning Strike waiting in Dylan's hand for it. And there we have a Midnight Assassin. That's a 1/2 flying Death Touch. A very underpowered feeling card in the current meta game, but I guess Sander was looking for some more vampire synergy, and it also helps in the to deal with Tolarian terrors. Unfortunately, it gets syncopated. Does Dylan want to let Sander untap with that Harvester in play? Because then he'll be able to use its ability. No, Lightning strikes it, gets rid of it. The Delver didn't flip. So it's just a 1/1. Still not a 3/2 flying. Looks like Sander was thinking here. So representing a Make Disappear. Or another 2 mana interactive spell. Most likely counter spell, as Lightning Strike wouldn't be that interesting right now. Discards a mountain to his blood token to draw. So it was all bluff since we're on a single card. And Sander's turn. It's getting close to single digits on 12 life here. So he does need to draw into something that actually gets him somewhere. And he goes in the tank. Gonna fast forward his think tank, as it is Dylan's turn now. Nothing happened. So on the attack, Delver flipped. So the race is 1 turn away from finishing in Dylan's favor here. As we see a glimpse of his hand, there is a make disappear in there. I think a Tolarian Terror as well. And is that an Arcane Infusion or something else? I couldn't tell. Sander not playing anything at the end of Dylan's turn either. Has 3 cards now, so we should hope that he has something to play. And we get a Wandering Eye. 4 mana open for Sander, so he can pay for a make disappear. Dylan thinking about it. Arranges his mana. Only has 2 blue available, which might constrict him a little bit here. And goes for Arcane Infusion, pumping the Electrostatic Infantrist. Sees another make disappear, and I can't really make out the other cards. Gets a Syncopate, okay. So is representing that Sander won't be doing much with the card that he draws, unless it costs 2 or less. Six cards to look at from the Wandering Eye. And he gets a Hungry for More. I think the card is called. Makes a 3/1 haste lifelink trample. I think vampire with flashback. So Hungry for More. And we get a wipeable. No, it isn't Fake Your Own Death. Card viewer is all kinds of confused. I was the card viewer, I get to say this. So vampire, lifelink, Thwance, and Gurnger. That's what it says to me. Oh no, trample, lifelink, haste. 3/1, everything's on there. So the lifelink, very important here, as it will make sure Sander survives another attack. Has that 2 mana up again. But we know Dylan has a Syncopate in hand. Sander knows as well. There we go, Hungry for More. Card viewer Nils from the past finally figured it out. It's so annoying with all these alternate art cards, especially the really black ones from the Innistrad sets. So difficult, very hard for casters. Yes, yes. So 3 in the air, that's gonna trade with the Wandering Eye, unless the Electrostatic Infantrist is lethal, and Dylan decides to keep it back, maybe because he has Make Disappear in hand, just making sure that in a pinch he can make sure that is safe. There's Trample on the Electrostatic Pillar, Electrostatic Infantrist as well, and we have Fake Your Own Death onto that Wandering Eye. Dylan has already shown a Syncopate from a Arcane Infusion. So let's see how he decides to interact here. Goes with that Syncopate that he's already shown, pumps up the Electrostatic Infantrist with that, and 1 toughness on that Wandering Eye is going to put him at 3, which is lethal from the Delver as well next turn. So an attack with both would have given him the win. Though in that case, he probably would have traded with the Delver. Tolarian Terror comes in. and Dylan still has that make disappear up. Corpse Connoisseur for Sander, so gets to exile something from the graveyard and draw a card. Don't think that's going to be too relevant in the current situation. Yeah, if he exiles a creature, he gets to look at the top 3 and take a card. And again, the very powerful creature gives you card selection and some interaction. I'm gonna fast forward Sander's thinking phase here as we go Impulse, looks at the cards. Oh. Looks at the cards and apparently scoops them up. All right, so that wraps up game number 1. Let's have a little look at their sideboards to see what they might bring to the table. For Sander, we have Duresses, Goblin Firebomb, not so relevant probably. Voltage Surges, more creature removal. I don't think he needs it. But he might replace some of his other removal spells with cheaper ones. That is always an option. Disdainful Stroke gets rid of a terror, so quite narrow, but maybe he wants to go for that. And then there's a little bit more interaction for him. On Dylan's hand, we have and the Festivities, that won't do anything. Epicure if he wants to be more aggressive. I don't think that's where he wants to be. A Braid doesn't really have the targets that it wants to find, but Negate really solid in these kind of interactions. Don't think he needs the Mirror's Shell Crab, but who am I to tell? Let's have our players show for themselves. It looks like Dylan is bringing in the 3 negates and 2 of something else here. And I'm not sure what Sander has done. We're gonna fast forward just a wee little bit. It's so nice to have this power. When live casting, you can't do this. It's so much nicer in rebroadcasting. Zwip, zwip, zwip. That's 3 minutes of talking I didn't need to do, and we're off to the race. So let's go back a little bit further just to see if we had any mulligans. So, Dylan presenting. Oh, my microphone dropping. Come back, microphone. I still need you. And it does seem Dylan mulliganed, and it looks like Sander got to keep his opening 7. Yes. All right, we're off for game number 2. The impulse is still there from last game, and this time we have the turn 1 Delver, which is answered immediately by the Voltage Surge. So that could be from the sideboard. But I do think he played some main as well. This is not the time to get hiccups, buddy. Another use for the blood tokens, of course, the Voltage Surge. Voltage Surge. Languaging is hard sometimes. And again, we hit that mid-game stage without much happening. We have 7 mana on the 7 mana sources on the board, and only 2 1-mana spells have been cast so far. This is indicative of more counter spells having entered the game, as players want to make sure they keep up the interaction for their opponent. Thrill of Possibility for Sander, in a very ugly alternate art version, in my honest opinion. Pardon me. Against the discard and draw 2. Discarded another Voltage Surge and finds Corpse Connoisseur. That Thrill was At the end of Dylan's turn, Corpse Appraiser, Corpse Connoisseur is a completely different card, of course. There is a Delver in that graveyard, so he will get the card selection effect. Dylan deciding to check again. What does this do? There is 2 mana up for Sander, and both these players have been representing permission spells so far. So unless Dylan has doubles, it seems unlikely he'd want to interact with it. He has 1 Make Disappear as the only... Is there? Ah, no, there is a Syncopate. Countered unless you pay 3. So Sander could counter this. We've seen a negate in hand already. But that leaves him down to no mana to interact on Dylan's turn. That's negate countering the Syncopate, and that Corpse Connoisseur is going to resolve exiling the Delver and getting to select cards. Drops 2 lands in the graveyard. Still has what looks like to be 2 lands in hand. So we are at that point where you would call this flooded, but we are looking at 2 control decks. Now Dylan has free reign over the turn, doesn't need to fear any interaction, and uses that to drop an electrostatic infantry on the board. Has a lightning strike available that has chosen not to kill the Corpse Appraiser, because that again would leave him open to interaction and then might lead to an empty board, which I guess he's not so fond of at this point, because Sander is ahead in the card department just slightly. But of course 2 of them are lands. Dylan has 4 business cards. business spells in hand. All right. So Dylan almost has Sander back to his starting life total. And it looks like Sander might be winning the race with the 3-3 against a 1-2. But boy oh boy can that race swiftly change when the infantry starts to pick up a bit of a buzz here and there and a counter from the interaction that might happen. Problematic part on that field is the fact that Sander has almost twice as much mana available to him as Dylan. So those Make Disappears start feeling a little awkward in Dylan's hands. Dylan seems to be eyeing his lightning strike here to start some interaction with Sander, growing his electrostatic infantry dwarf in the process. Tap that little dude. Oh, and we have Fake Your Own Death as probably the perfect answer to the removal spell. The treasure token doesn't do that much here, but it's still nice. I think Dylan read the card as though that he's getting the treasure. That's gonna be a bit disappointing, or he just readied it as he's still thinking on whether or not he wants to let that resolve. There is a 5 mana untapped for Sander, and we have the treasure for Sander the Ridder comes into play. Doesn't have a creature to exile, so he won't be drawing a card. Okay, not sure what the confusion is about. Chooses to exile the lightning strike. Okay. So no Corpse Connoisseuring this time around. And Dylan goes for his turn. Still woefully behind Dip bind, Jesus, talking. In the mana development, 4 mana to 7. And doesn't really have that many more cards in hand to show for it. Another electrostatic infanterist to make sure he has extra +1/+1 counters for every spell that he plays. And now it can go really fast. Don't forget, Sander is up 1 game to 0. And yes, there was a bit of a misunderstanding. The lightning strike should not have been exiled. It can only exile creatures, I believe. We see the card here again. Exile up to 1 target creature card. The card was misread, thankfully without much impact, so we rewinded the situation. At this point, Sander's still winning the race, but just 1 spell might turn that around. Midnight Assassin for Sander, 1/2 flying touch of death. Enough, probably, to keep the race in his favor if Dylan has no way of interacting here. But with so much mana available for Sander, he can just throw out threats and interaction and interact with Dylan's permission. We see Syncopate and Make Disappear for Dylan. Both very awkward if you're behind in mana. Syncopate X is 0 just to put some +1/+1 counters on those electrostatic infanterists. Funny thing is, Sander can choose not to pay the 0 and have his spell be exiled. Chooses not to, which I believe is a strategically sound decision. Yes, yes. Quite sophisticated, this man. Yes. So let's see how Dylan is going to navigate this situation, because like I said, the mana disadvantage that he has is really punishing him, making him make disappears a lot worse. Chooses not to attack and hopes to interact with the Corpse Connoisseur. So the Midnight Assassin coming in the air gives him 12 turns to sort of claw himself back into the game, hoping that Sander might get a bit impatient. Sander gets another land drop. He's now on twice the amount of mana that Dylan has. And that Fake Your Own Death on the Corpse Connoisseur and the extra card he drew is proving to be quite valuable, as he's not really falling behind in cards in hand. Has just 1 less than Dylan, even though he has 4 lands more. There was also the Thrill of Possibility, which got rid of 2 lands actually. So Sander was crazily... the Thrill got rid of a Voltage Surge, and the 2 lands were dropped from the Corpse Connoisseur activation. So Sander could have had 10 lands and very little business if that it's not Corpse Connoisseur, Corpse Appraiser Corpse Appraiser didn't show up. Whew. The match is slowing down quite a bit though, as Dylan is trying to figure out how to navigate around what he sees on the other side of the table. The interesting part is Sander didn't even try to attack here, as we have Delver of Secrets joining the fray. Another threat. If that flips, it's pressure onto that that Midnight Assassin, of course. Sander is going deep into the tank until he decides to go for a Hungry for More. Finally starts grabbing possession of the race, pushes both of them in. Which is a bit peculiar, as we have a 4 toughness electrostatic infanterist on the other side. So there might be a sweeper effect coming in the benefit of Sander here. 3 mana. And we have, yes, Malicious Affliction, I think the card is called. It's the alt art for the 2 mana instant, that 3 mana instant that deals 2 damage to all non-vampire creatures. That's gonna leave only the other electrostatic infanterist on the table, but goes for Make Disappear, sacrificing the Delver that would die, and in the process putting a +1/+1 counter onto his infanterists, which should wait, that would put it at 5 toughness, so the larger infanterist would still die in the interaction on the board, but here we have Go for the Throat. And there we see Vampire's Vengeance, the alt art. Go for the Throat on the larger one, which is confusing to me, as it is still going for the graveyard. But he does get to keep his Corpse Appraiser, as Dylan has a fresh 3/4 to block the Corpse Appraiser. But he is starting to lose the race. There's another flashback to Hungry for More. A card that still feels a bit awkward in this slow and grindy deck. Pretty much needs his Mythic, the legendary vampire, before that Hungry for More really starts to add to the core plan for this deck. And we have Fable of the Mirror Breaker for Dylan. Very mainstay in the Gentry red decks. Seems like it's very hard to find something in red that you want to do more than Fabling the Mirror Breaker, unless you're in well, actually making copies of anything except, there we go, with Tolarian Terror. Isn't that interesting? You don't really care about the well, 3/2 flyer is kind of nice, I suppose. But a Tolarian Terror is the big baddie of Gentry. Another one of those Gentry cornerstones at the moment. And quite a turning point in this, well, quite a decider really in this match. Sander has been in the driving seat for most of it. We're in the Fable discard. Discards 2. That is a Syncopate and a Make Disappear. Cards that are quite underwhelming in the current setup due to the mana disadvantage. We've talked about plenty already. And we have another Electrostatic Infantry. But that needs to raise a Tolarian Terror. So we are definitely struggling to get back into this game. Though it only takes a Tolarian Terror for Dylan to turn this one around again. Actually keeps the land in hand, fanning out the 2 cards that he has to imply he has more interaction than he can actually bring to the table. And we have the Alpha Strike for Sander. This is for lethal and then some. Blocking the Tolarian Terror gets us on a 7-point swing. But with 22 life to play with, Sander doesn't really need to worry about the backswing, even with that Fable of the Mirror Breaker about to transform into that aspect or figure of Kikijiki. He can block the Vampire Token or the Corpse Appraiser for free, sort of with his his bigger Infanterist. And there he's holding the 2/2 token from the Saga, but decides to try and kill, it seems like, the Tolarian Terror. That's the only reason you would block like this. We have 4 power in front of the Tolarian Terror. There is some block sorting that needs to happen now. And Dylan is representing 2 cards, though we know he only has 1. So if Sander chooses to have the larger blocker to be the primary receiver of the damage, he will kill it. But it looks like Dylan is deciding to step away from that bluff, though that's a really interesting strategical decision that both players need to make in that interaction. So it's sad we can't talk more about about that block decision and the impact it has on Sander. Takes 6 here, down to 2, and will lose his 2/2 token from the Fable. That would be the outcome if nothing happens here. It actually goes to 1 because the Vampire token does have trample as well. I didn't see what Dylan has in hand besides the mountain. Is that a play with fire? A bit underwhelming. Bumps the Infanterists again. Gets rid of the Midnight Assassin, but that Midnight Assassin is only going to be relevant really if Dylan is starting to attack. Though I suppose if he didn't have it, he would have been at 1 and had a flyer on the other side of the board. So that would have been a lethal Midnight Assassin for next turn had it survived. And we get the aspect. So we have infinite jump blockers for the Tolarian Terror. But what Dylan really wants to find is another Tolarian Terror so that he can block and trade. Preferably with the token copy. Dylan drew another land, so after being stuck in the mana department for most of this game, he now feels like he can't play them because he needs to represent interaction. Very nice play from Dylan here, very composed, wants to give Sander the opportunity to make mistakes here more than anything. Decides to double block. And again, we have that question here for Sander. Do you put... Now we get the interaction. Does decide to put the bigger electrostatic Infanterist in front, which is a pretty scary thing. Like any spell there for Dylan would have left... would have left Dylan with both of his electrostatic Infanterists. So, pretty scary decision for Sander to make. And now we see an empty board with only Dylan having non-land permanents. So this could be the beginning of a very, very big turnaround. But it is gonna take a while. Dylan finally got to play one of his lands he has been sandbagging and bluffing with. And Sander seemed to be in the tank, not sure about what. Especially since apparently he has another Tolarian Terror. The only thing, that's his second of 2 Tolarian Terrors as well. Arcane Infusion for Dylan gets to look for more interaction. Finds a play with fire. I got to choose between a play with fire and a play with fire. So very strong tactical play here. So let's see. He still has infinite chump blockers for the Tolarian Terror in that reflection. So he doesn't really need to worry about that yet too much. That ward, again, making the mana situation for Dylan a bit awkward, since his spells don't really interact with a Tolarian Terror that well. We'll need a Lightning Strike plus a play with fire, or 2 Lightning Strikes, to be able to deal with it. So that's adding 4 mana to his answer for the Terror. And oh, here we have Shoulder It. Doesn't have ward, but it only takes 1 activation on, well, 1 trigger on Shoulder It to kill Dylan here. So Dylan has to dig for an answer. Looks like he found an Abrade that, together with his play with fire, can deal with that Shoulder It at least. And like we said before, we have infinite blockers for the Tolarian Terror in the reflection. There we go. And it looks like Dylan is deciding to go for it in Sander's turn, rather than waiting for his own upkeep so he has more mana available. And there is the Make Disappear, sacrificing Tolarian Terror to counter the second removal spell, and making sure that Dylan dies to the Shoulder It trigger. And Dylan sees the writing on the wall, scoops them up, and we are going to a game number 3 in this match. So let's fast forward. Looks like our players are going back to their decks. 2 card swap for Sander. Dylan seems to have a card face down on the table as well. Cuts an Abrade for what looks like to be some permission spell. As he's going to be on the draw this time, so kind of forced to be a little bit more interactive. Oh, let's go back a little bit to see if we're keeping opening 7s as we go into a game number 3 in the match between Dylan and Sander. Sander on 7, Dylan on 6, I think. Yes. And we're off to the races. I hate that expression, and I say it so many times. No 1-drop for Dylan. No electrostatic infantrist either. We have Arcane Infusion. Dylan gets to set up his hand, shows the Syncopate. Looks like he has quite a bit of interaction. Still draws into an Abrade double or even triple play with fire there for Dylan. So Probably hoping to see a bunch of Blood Tithe Harvesters for him to interact with. And it is a Midnight Assassin. That also works. A 1/2. Might as well get rid of it if you have all those Play with Fires in your hand. No third land for Dylan though. So we went from another game where he has to fight back from a mana disadvantage. Corpse Appraiser for Sander. He can exile his own creature. So he will get the card selection effect from the Corpse Appraiser. Doesn't mind appraising your own corpse. Well, corpse from your own graveyard. It's not your own corpse. Don't worry, don't worry. We're fine, we're fine. Yep, exiles the Midnight as in, and gets the effect. Both players checking after they made the mistake in the previous game. Yes, yes, that is how the card works. And ditching what looks like a Hungry for More and a land. And the Abrade gets rid of the Appraiser. Draws land number 3. And I do believe that's one of Dylan's rares that we have there. So we see the Abrade. Ah, it's another Fable of Kikijika. We instantly get rid of the token with the Voltage Surge. And we'll hopefully see Dylan dig into more lands. Interestingly, keeps the Arcane Infusion in hand, discards the 2 other Play with Fires, finds land number 4. It is a mountain though, so he still can't double counter, which he probably would like to do. And I see a red Planeswalker in his hand there. So let's see. Dylan is fighting back from a card disadvantage. Started on 6, let's not forget. And Sander has drawn an extra card, the best of 3 even, from the Corpse Appraiser. So Dylan really is not really able to put pressure on Sander at this point with the tempo he's implied to have as the starting player. And Wandering Mind, not I, sorry. Resolving might just be the beginning of the end for Sander, as the card advantage ticker is already on -3, -4, depending on how you look at it. But thankfully it is just between parentheses a Hungry for More. Don't think he'll be too sad to trade card advantage for tempo, as life totals aren't really relevant at this point of the match yet. Dylan pausing a little bit, implying he cares about the token. I don't believe you are. You're not fooling anyone with that charade. Gives him the go. Yes, you have your token. I think he has now 2 Hungry for Mores in that graveyard. So he has a virtual 6 extra powers. Fires off that Arcane Infusion. And finds, looks like a mountain that he didn't really want anyway. So he's digging himself closer to the island he does want. Though I suppose he would prefer to just have them rather than dig towards them. Looks like a Syncopate, a Make Disappear, a land, and another card. And we're going for the other card, which is Arcane Infusion. Ooh. Kind of awkward since, again, Dylan only has the 1 source, and that red card in his hand was a Lightning Strike, so gets rid of the Wandering Mind, which already drew cards, so it's kind of awkward. But the card is a Hungry for More, so it's kind of okay. And we have Jaya, the Planeswalker, joining the reflection of Kiki-Jiki as a rare and or mythic on the table. And Jaya brings a little monk friend with prowess. Interesting abilities there, with especially the -2. Seems so awkward to see on a planeswalker, but quite interesting. Kind of forces you to play her together with creatures rather than just being another boring control-based planeswalker we usually see in Gentry. He did tap out for that, so Sander has free reign here. Decides to dump all of that free reign into double Hungry for more flashback, probably to put pressure back onto that. Yeah, Jaya. That does give him the 6 damage he needs to get rid of her, even if the prowess monk blocks. So Dylan wondering whether he wants to keep Jaya or the reflection here, as a block with the reflection would make the difference. So you want to keep your rare or your mythic, Mr. Dylan? Decides he wants to keep the mythic. She will drop down to 1 loyalty though. And Sander still has 1 mana available. Yeah, Dylan decides, screw the reflection. All I have is a 1/1 prowess token to copy anyway. Gimme Jaya. Alright. So he can make tokens. That's a +1, which is quite interesting. I think the -1 is exiling the top card and playing it. The red way of drawing cards, if you may. And we finally have a second island for Dylan. So those arcane infusions now can be cast to dig for counter spells. Giving Dylan a lot more flexibility and comfortability in a match. Also, Sander doesn't have anything to put pressure back on the board. There's a Blood Tithe Harvester. It's just kind of funny after discarding all those Play with Fires earlier. Dylan, head in his hands. Seems to be like we have another art than the one that's shown here. Too many versions of cards these days. Being a caster is a terrible, terrible hobby. What am I doing to myself? I must really love you guys and Gentry a lot. Like a lot. Another monkey as Luna joins the commentary. So, swings in. We haven't cast a spell yet, but as those monks do have prowess, so they get +1/+1 with every non-creature spell you play. And we see Dylan already fingering that lightning strike eagerly. That's a choice of words. Fingering the lightning strike eagerly. But we have a ledge thingamajiggas. Luna, I'm talking to the people on the internet. You have food. Why are you complaining? Cats are so difficult to live with. I still don't know what's it called. Ledge something. Ledge shredder. Ledger shredder? Ah, I thought it was like a bird sitting on a ledge. But no, it's a ledger shredder. So Dylan anticipating Casting spells in this combat. Pretty much signaling that he will be casting a spell, otherwise he wouldn't play it. Daring Sander to block here. Sander looking at the options hidden in his hand. Has 4 or even 5 cards, I'm not sure. Dylan has that lightning strike he has fingered so eagerly. Wait, apparently he took the damage. Oh, we're in the next turn already. Jesus. See, that's what you get when you get distracted by cats. Corpse Connoisseur finds... was that 3 lightning strikes? And he took the 3rd one? That would be quite funny. What's the card in the back? The one you took. No, it was something else. So he ditched 2 lightning strikes for something he deemed better. Even though the lightning strike could have dealt with Jaya here. So it must be a pretty good card that he chose to keep. Another Blood Tithe Harvester, and that is the 2nd spell you play this turn. So, Knife from the Ledger Shredder. Got a Electrostatic Infantrist, which is gonna hit the bin in favor of keeping a Arcane Infusion, a Lightning Strike, and I think a Syncopate. Seems like Dylan is anticipating being able to use that Syncopate right here, right now. But Sander has been quite diligent in playing around that kind of interaction. So one mana, uses the blood token to get rid of the land and goes back into the tank. That means I use my little fast forward button and we see he passed the turn, and Dylan is has cast Arcane Infusion, found a Consider, but hasn't cast it yet. So not a second trigger onto that Ledger Shredder. Ledger Shredder. That's a mouthful. And we have a Lightning Strike getting rid of a Blood Tithe rather than a Corpse Appraiser. Another Lightning Strike. This time getting rid of a Corpse Appraiser. That doesn't really make sense, but let's pretend that we don't know. And that means the Ledger Shredder triggers. Knives drops a land, sadly. But those monks are hitting for 3 each. So that is a 11-point attack here. The Blood Tithe can interact here, but both players should know there is a Consider still in Dylan's hand. Oh, decides to play the Consider even though he didn't block. Yep. So that is 12, 14 damage all the way down to 14. Halves his life total. There are a lot of accidental life gain in Sander's deck. As he goes into his graveyard, he's counting out his instants and sorceries. So it looks like a Tolarian Terror is about to join the battlefield. Yep, 4 cheaper. TT, Tolarian Terror hits the battlefield. Dylan is tapped out, so he can't interact with this. Has a bunch of blockers for it though, but only 2 cards in hand. There are some arcane infusions in that graveyard that still can get flashed back, which is probably why he will be playing some of those lands in his hand. Yeah. Would be nice to draw into Considers if he wants to double pump the monks here. So there's definitely some options available to him. That's an extra connive. So that's hitting for 12 in total. Well, 9, because he will block with one with the Tolarian Terror. Puts him down to 5. So that would keep back the Bloodtide Harvester. But instead decides to pass priority. So wants to use that option to go arcane into 1 mana spell to block that Tolarian Terror, I suppose. And let's see what actually happens. If he wants to do that, he should do it before blockers, so he knows what he's working with. Decides not to block. Interesting. Gives him alternatives. Might be going for the kill then. But we're still in that game where he threw away a bunch of play with fires. And we have a Corpse Appraiser, 5 mana available, so a Syncopate couldn't stop this. Gets rid of a creature, so he will get the effect again. And that's a Make It Disappear, I think, going into his hand. Not really something to be super excited for, though again, he has the mana advantage, so it is better for him than it would be for Dylan. Flashback, Arcane Infusion. Will Sunder interact? Flashes in a magic card. Is that the legendary vampire? Evelyn? Yeah? Yeah, could be. Yeah, I think it is. Evelyn the Covetous. So this is the main reason I believe that Sunder is playing Hungry for More. As I'm yawning again. This is still in response to the Arcane Infusion. It is the second spell that Sunder plays, so Dylan gets to connive with the Ledger Shredder. Not sure what he saw there. Gets rid of the Syncopate. Found a Consider, so he can double spell himself already. Conniving again with the Ledger Shredder. Evelyn resolves, so we are going to see her effect, and it finds, I think that's a Hungry for More and a Make Disappear, and that Hungry for More will be replacing itself. Oh, that's 5 cards, not 4 cards. So we're gonna fix that really quick. Should be to take a random card and shuffle that, shuffle that into the unknown portion of the deck. We saw Sunder's manicured pause there, making sure that happens correctly. So he shuffled, selected a card at random. That one is going shuffled into the deck, the random part of the deck. Not sure why we're getting so many cards from the bottom. Did he scry that many cards? don't think he did. But then again, random cards are random cards. And this isn't a high stakes tournament. This is more a tournament where you feel honored, pleased to be involved in the first place. These players were all invited as players for this event to showcase what the Gentry metagame is about. To a degree, they were even forced in their deck choices. So don't mirror people's deck choices on what you expect from them for future events, because you might get mightily surprised. So consider second spell. So he should have connived, but I was rambling on him about other stuff, so I missed if he did or not. Unless it only triggers once, which I don't think is the case. But we're going to ignore that question and just continue with the match. As Dylan is fighting quite the uphill battle, that Evelyn on the other side is going to be putting a lot of pressure on him, especially with that Hungry for More already in the exile for her to cast. We see Dylan getting a 1-mana Tolarian Terror, so he is quite set up to start building up something. But with being on just 9 life, he does have to be a bit careful. I'm surprised he didn't choose to attack with the ledger duty, though I suppose that his jump hook potential is pretty low at this point. Guess that is the token from the Hungry for More. Yeah, we get another trigger, Electrostatic Pillar, and I think that is Fake Your Own Death that was revealed. So that could be another trigger for Evelyn. See, suddenly a lot of these card selections make sense, but I don't know, basing that much of your deck around Magical Christmas Land with one of your rares seems to be quite enthusiastic, as one would say. Flashes back the Hungry for More for a second token. But so that's on the stack. We get the Connive trigger off the Ledger Shredder. Dylan finds another Make Disappear, gets rid of Make Disappear, gets a +1/+1 counter, and that makes the Ledger Shredder a 3/5. And that is a Make Disappear of his own, sacrificing one of his monks to make sure that he is countering the spell, since Sander has 3 mana available. So Sander does not get another trigger of Evelyn, but he does have a bunch available. One counter spell makes it so that those monks are 2/2s currently. So any spell in Dylan's hand could make this attack really awkward. And Sander decides to just come in for 3. The Tolarian Terror can just jump this as well. Yeah, Voltage Surge could still be cast if he decides to block with Tolarian Terror, even through the ward. Probably does not want to interact with that, as he only has 2 cards available. 1 card available. Wow. Delver for Dylan. So keeps growing his army. to pay attention to the fact that there is a make disappear. I do believe Evelyn allows you to cast the cards whenever you want. Doesn't specify a window. Oh, sorry. As this game is grinding to a halt. Transforming the Delver could be the key to putting pressure back, but Sander has decided to start using the Evelyn cards. So gets Dylan's electrostatic infantry. And after some thinking, decides to go for the Throat of the Tolarian Terror. Pays 2 extra for the Ward ability. Dylan thinking about how he wants to interact with this. Had the Connive trigger from the Ledger and got rid of a land. And Sander indicates that there is a trigger for the electrostatic infantrist on the stack right now. 3 out of the 4 players we've seen so far have had electrostatic pillagers, infantrist, even though one of them didn't own them.
He steals that, my precious.
So Dylan in the tank checks that Evelyn again. Yes, sir, it is taking over this game in a bad way. 4 mana for Syncopate. Counter unless you pay 3. But Sander has the negate to interact in another way. And that gets rid of the Tolarian Terror. As Sander might be over-respecting the board position in favor of Dylan. I do feel like an attack here might have been warranted. Delver of Seeker turns into its insectile aberrative alter ego as a lightning strike was found on the top of the deck. That can get rid of a Blood Tithe Harvester, a Corpse Appraiser, but not really anything that Dylan is really struggling with. Cut down to get rid of the aberration, as that could have started to go on the offense. 6-turn clock. I have a feeling that 6 turns is not what Dylan has available to him. As Sander has finally starting to get on the offensive. Keeps back his prized Evelyn, and there's still that fake hero on death in the graveyard, so lots of blocks for Dylan here are very awkward. Allowing that Corpse Appraiser or that Blood Tithe Harvester to come back will trigger the Evelyn again and will bring their own benefits. So not many interesting or good choices for him here. As Sander has 7 mana open, 2 cards available to him. More mana and more cards. Arcane Infusion though. So we're even on cards. That puts... Oh, didn't find anything. That's unfortunate. So that puts those monks at 2-2. That's an easy block. Trades there. The Ledger has 6 toughness now. As Dylan is forced to jump block here, as the attack would otherwise be lethal. Fake your own death. To pump the electrostatic infanterist, and that concludes the match as well. So Sander defeats Dylan with his Grixis value vampire deck. So that means that blue-red Delver, Tempo Delver, is no longer in this tournament. It was one of the favorites according to a bunch of players because it is so flexible in dealing with different opponents. But I guess we'll have a grindy deck joining in for the semi-final, for the second round of this event. So stay tuned and we'll get you to the next games.